Hey everybody, time for part 3 of our 42nd Street Megastation saga. We are still in the ramp, and I have been stuck in a Times Square rabbit hole for the past 2 days, so I'm going to bring you down with me because to see this artwork, I really feel like we need some context on the history of Times Square. So let's get into it. Used to be called Longacre Square, was named after a similar square in London. This is an amazing photograph of Longacre Square from the Museum of the City of New York archives. Newspapers at this time were actually further downtown near City Hall on Park Row. This is 41 Park Row, which was the original home of the New York Times. Newspapers would start moving up north. The New York Herald would move to Herald Square. The New York Times followed suit up to Broadway between 42nd and 43rd. The new building was built between 1902 and 1904. At the same time, the Interborough Rapid Transit Company was building the first line of the new subway that would also have a stop in this location. In fact, the new subway would actually run through the basement of the new Times building, and the original printing presses were underneath the subway. There was even a beautiful entrance built into the building. You're seeing that there. Both the Rapid Transit Commission and the IRT recommended that the name Longacre Square be changed to Times Square, and on April 8, 1904, Mayor George McClellan renamed it in honor of the paper's new location. Shortly thereafter, they would officially call the subway station Times Square because naming a station simply 42nd Street or Broadway would be confusing since there were other stations located on those streets. And the first New Year's Eve celebration here was organized by the New York Times to inaugurate their new headquarters. They literally set off dynamite from the top of the building to celebrate in 1904, which was amazing, but also highly dangerous. So the fire department said no more of that, and they switched to the ball dropping in 1907. Now on to the Revelers. Times Square in the 70s and 80s went a little downhill. You would not want to bring your kids here back then. And there was an artist named Jane Dixon who was living in the area. She actually lived in Times Square for around 30 years, starting in the 70s. And she would walk around and take photographs, and then she would create these paintings. So we're looking at her photographs, and then we're going to look at some of her paintings so you can get a feel for her style, because I think it'll really help understand the mosaics that we're going to be looking at. There's a lot more to Jane Dixon, but I really want to get to the Revelers. One thing she didn't love about Times Square was New Year's Eve, because in the early days it was dangerous, also always so loud. So normally she planned on not even being here during that time. One year she was pregnant with her daughter and she couldn't travel, so New Year's Eve she tried to sleep, couldn't, thought, I hate this, and I make good work about things I hate, walked to Times Square and took lots of photos of that New Year's Eve, which she used to make paintings that she had in a show in the 90s. These paintings would eventually morph into the Revelers. The early paintings were kind of bleak and monochromatic, so she wanted to lighten it up for the MTA installation. So she made up the colors using Murano glass and the hues of her children's paints, which I think you can really see. So now that I understand a little bit more about the time period, the artist, her work, it really makes me appreciate these a lot more. And who knows, maybe I will start walking a little more slowly in the ramp so I can get a better look. Sometimes